Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I appreciate it.
How do I pronounce your name?
Jawad.
What?
Jawad.
Okay, Jawad. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Nice to
And
meet
nice to meet you too.
you. And where are you?
I'm based out of Toronto, Canada,
Uh-huh.
and you're in California, I'm assuming.
Today we're in California, yeah.
Just wanted to start off, Bo, with how did you get started in the world of production design and your work in the very beginning? I know you worked with Tim Burton a lot in the beginning stages, but just kind of run me through how did you want to decide that you want to become a production designer and your journey through it?
I was trained to be an architect, and I went to architecture school, got a professional degree, passed the test, and was working at a firm in Los Angeles. And even though I loved the education and I love architecture and still do, I hated the job. And I was tipped off. I was living in LA, and I was tipped off that, well, with your skill set, you should go look into set design and art direction and production design. So I did. I went to Universal Studios in 1977 and met with Hank Myers, who ran the set design department. And more or less, I went twice. And the second time he hired me on the spot and said, "Start tomorrow." And I went back to the architecture firm. It was a big, stuffy firm, and said, "I quit and I'm done today." And they made me take a psychological evaluation test to make sure I hadn't just gone crazy. And they said, "How could you leave the profession?" And I said, "Well, for starters, tomorrow I see people having fun at work, and I'm going to make twice as much money." And so prior to that, I really had no awareness of, art direction, production design in movies. But as it turns out, it was a very good fit for me. And I worked at Universal for like a year and a half, and then I went out, and that was one of the last big art departments within a studio. And then everything started to change, and everyone became more or less an independent contractor. And I went out, worked as a set designer and an art director, and eventually, a couple of years later, I got lucky and was asked to design a TV movie and then a Showtime movie, and then my first production design job was Lost Boys in 1985 or something. Yeah. Okay. So it's a combination of luck and just I respond to characters and narrative more than I do return per square foot on the dollar investment.
Well said. But were you always at any point when you were making that transition before that, were you into film movies? Like, were you like an avid moviegoer? Like, 70s was a big year for films like Godfather and The Dog Day Afternoon, and obviously Star Wars came out.
No, I was a huge fan of movies then, and to this day, if Godfather 2 especially comes across the screen, I can't look away. I can't not look at it. But I really, as a kid growing up, my dad taught at Sunday school, and he would take his class repeatedly to Ben-Hur. And I remember going to see Ben-Hur, and that was fairly mind-blowing at the time. And you just assume that they went and filmed Ben-Hur when you're a kid. You don't realize that it involves, hundreds of craftsmen and people and stuff. So early on, I loved movies, but I had no awareness of who did what, because I was raised in rural Pennsylvania. After I came to the West Coast, of course, you can't avoid it. But even then, it was entirely different. I would say when I got into it in the mid to late 70s, there was no internet, there weren't entertainment magazines, there weren't the television shows that, you know, there was none of that back then. So nobody, the job was sort of mysterious and not as well known, which made it better.
For sure. And how did you get involved in Tim Burton's? I think, correct me if I'm wrong. I think his one of his major films, first major films, was Beetlejuice. There was the other one, the Frankie. I think it was the dog movie that he did, the black and white one. But was that
Yeah.
your first film with him? And how did you get involved with him?
Um, I think his first feature at Warner Brothers was Pee Wee's Big Adventure,
That's right. Thank you.
and so I was at Warner Brothers doing Lost Boys, and he had just set up an office at Warner Brothers where he had done Pee Wee, and was about to do Beetlejuice, and I heard about it, and my agent at the time managed to get Tim to meet me, and I think we had a big set built for Lost Boys on the stage, and he wandered through there on his own and saw enough evidence of design that he then met me, and so we met, and then we, you know, he hired me, and we did the movie. We did Beetlejuice, which you know, really that was a huge jump. I mean, Lost Boys was very well received and did well, and it kind of has its fan base. But Beetlejuice kind of launched me, so that after that, you know, I had no shortage of work.
Yeah, Beetlejuice was an incredible film, but I remember when I first saw it, it was in the early 90s, and I loved it because it was, I mean, I was 14 years old, and I loved it for what it was, like just like an entertaining, fun movie. And
Yeah.
it never dawned on me at that time the amount of work that goes behind it, like, you know, in terms of production design or art direction and whatnot. But being, you know, now that I'm basically a full-time filmmaker, and I look back at all those films, and I was watching it with my wife a couple of weeks ago, and the amount of art direction that went in it, and production design, and all the little details that I noticed that I never did before was phenomenal. So that and Edward Scissorhand to me, or, you know, I think you worked on, you know, you worked on that too.
Yes.
Were very, very, and it's funny because, you know, there's always this thing, oh, that's a Tim Burton feel film, right? Like, but you don't realize there's so many people behind it, and obviously you being one of them. So I want to thank you for, you know, making those worlds, because those are embedded in our heads, at least for me, and I'm sure millions of other fans. So thank you so much.
Oh, please, you're welcome. And it was, you know, it really turned my head around working with Tim on that. Prior to that, everybody in art direction was, oh, well, this has to match that, and this has to feel real, and oh, you don't want to distract from the narrative, and by you know, pushing it too hard. And in his animation background and his artistic sensibility led me in a completely different direction, and it was a real great education to work with him, and to like just go for it, you know. So I feel very, very, very lucky to have had that opportunity then. Who knows what might have happened? You know, at the end of Lost Boys, I was trying to get my next job, and I don't think I had met Tim Burton yet, and I went in and did an interview for what was that movie? Tony Scott did it.
Um, well, there was on Crimson Tide. It was the one before that.
No, it was way before that, and it was the second one of those. I I'm blanking. You know, it was only about 1,000,000 years ago. But that if I had gotten that, and I didn't get it, the job. If I had gotten that, my career would have taken a completely different course, because that was a more regular film set in a real world, and it was an action adventure kind of shooting and smashing, and it was a different film. So I feel very, very lucky to have done Beetlejuice.
Yeah, no, I think that was something you were destined for, because it shows in your work. It clearly does. And even, kind of moving on to the conversation that we're supposed to have, I think you were talking about Beverly Hills Cop 2. Is that what you were talking about?
Thank you. See how I've blocked it out of my Beverly Hills Cop 2. Yeah.
I mean,
With the late Tony Scott, who we met, and we really got along well. But when I went in to meet the producers, Jerry Bruckheimer and the late Don Simpson, that part of it did not go as smoothly.
I think if you had gone that route, obviously with Bruckheimer and late Don Simpson, you probably would have gone the direction of Michael Bay films, and because they have worked with him a lot. But I'm glad that you had your route the way it was, so I appreciate it.
Oh, thank God. Thank God. Yeah. And for a variety of other reasons as well. Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
For Cat in the Hat, so the Grinch came out in 2000 or 2001, I think. By Ron Howard directed it, Brian Gazer, Imagine producing it.
Yeah.
And it was very successful, Jim Carrey, and it was a Christmas movie. So is that how the birth of Cat in the Hat started? And if you can just run through the story of that.
Here's what happened. We were at the cottage in Muskoka, where we go a lot. And I got a phone call out of the blue from Mike Myers.
Yeah.
And he called and was looking. He wanted to talk about. He was going to do this movie Dieter, which I don't know whether you recall that. He had an SNL character.
Oh, right, yes.
Dieter, and he was going to make a filmed version of that. And would I be interested in designing it? And at that point, I was designing for, Men in Blacks and Mike Nichols, and that sounded a little strange design-wise for me. But I also, by then in my career, was interested in trying to direct. And I said, I don't want to design it, but I'll direct it. And he went, and his curiosity was piqued. And he's smart enough to know that when you get a first-time director, you can control them to a certain extent. So later on, that came together, and we started to prep Dieter. And the script was really funny. And we were a month or two away from shooting. We had this read through at the office in LA. And we had people like Will Ferrell and amazing comedians came in to read with just an audience of people. We picked about 30 people, and it was hysterical. However, all the laughs came on the heels of other people, and Dieter being he was not the person who generated the jokes. He created, you would react to his reaction. And I don't think he liked that. So he thought everyone else thought it went well. He thought it did not. And therefore announced after, we went away. It was like a 3-day weekend. Everyone was like high-fiving and this went great. And then Mike decided he didn't want to do it. He said the script is broken and cannot be fixed. So that was horrible. That was a terrible thing. But what happened was Universal rolled that pretty much into Cat in the Hat and said, all right, can we make a deal where we absorb what you've spent on Dieter and roll right into Cat in the Hat? And that's more or less how it happened. There was a little bit of time between the two. And to be honest, I was interested in directing. I thought it'd be fun. And when someone offers you the opportunity to direct $100 million movie, I think you'd have to be kind of insane not to say yes, or maybe you're insane to say yes. I'm not sure. Now I'm not sure which is the right answer. So that's how it evolved. Mike hired me, and we commenced pre-production.
It's interesting you mentioned the 100 million, insane to do it or insane not to do it. Uh, the amount of pressure. I mean, directing a film is a pressure by itself. Obviously, you have to be crazy enough to make a film, first of all, which is why people in
Yeah.
people in our profession are literally crazy, because it's not an easy thing to do. But to be able to have that on your head, the $100 million budget, not that it's going to you, but still, um,
Right.
and a team of people just sort of like literally relying on you, and you're the center of attention aside from being the cast. How was like, what was like, how did you deal with that pressure, if that there was any?
No, the pressure was mind-boggling.
Sure.
And I had as a production designer, I had worked on a lot of big budget movies. I'd been around it. It wasn't like I walked in blindly. I know what the pressure is like, having been around directors on big movies, and but you still underestimate it, because it's just staggeringly painful. But it's also intoxicating, because you get the deluxe playground toys, everything to do your thing. What's a little misleading is you get a $100 million movie, and we assembled a tremendously talented group of craftsmen. We had Chivo to shoot it. Alex McDowell designed it. We had amazing talent up and down for that, because these are people that I had worked with and met, and I said, hey, do you want to do a movie in town? And people with kids would say, yeah. And it, but that just compounds it. The pressure is, so I had all of that worked out, all of the, I knew how to do it. The part that's misleading is when you're a first-time director, you're as a director, you're responsible for the result, but you don't have complete control over every aspect of the making it, even though you're called director. So it's a little bit of a trap. And there were things that, I could not do how I wanted to do for a variety of reasons. Not to say that it would have been better or worse, but you get called director, you're responsible, but you don't really have complete control as a first time director.
You said there were some things that you had planned that didn't go your way. Can you give me some examples, or one example of those? Without, I'm not looking for any controversy. I'm literally just trying to understand your vision. That's all.
To be perfectly honest, everything worked out fine until post, and that's where it started to go awry, because we shot basically everything the way we wanted, the best we could, at that time. And then we did a director's cut, and it was going very, very well. After that, it kind of started to deteriorate. I can't say bad things about people, because
No, I'm not.
everyone tries to do their best when you enter into an enterprise like this. So it would be unfair for me to point fingers, but that's what happened. Is it kind of, there's a better movie in there had we been allowed to just follow through.
Completely understandable, and I don't like to hear names as well, because it's such a big thing, right? Making a film, whether you're making an independent film or $100 million film, and there's so
Right.
many, and there's no formula to any film that can be a super hit or a super flop. Everybody does desire to make the best film possible, and everybody's making decisions based on the market, based on the audience reaction, the screenings.
Yeah.
Was the director's cut a lot longer than what came out to be?
It was not really much longer, but it allowed other characters more time.
Yeah, and sorry, go on.
I think that the theory is, it was very, very difficult to make. First of all, because it's really weird. You take a Dr. Seuss character like Cat in the Hat, and the first part and the hardest part is, how do we represent this character that is so beloved in the book in a human form? So you spend a lot of time doing, makeup and prosthetics and tests. And I swear, if I had to do it again, I would use a different technology and probably use motion capture in order to get a less static, human-based, character tied to the physics of being a human. At the same time, they had paid for Mike Myers, and they wanted to see what he would do. They want to see his face. He needs to be comfortable. So that's a real conundrum that, in hindsight, I might execute differently but it just wasn't going to happen that way at this point. So
Right.
I forget what I was talking about. The other trap is, you take a book like Cat in the Hat, which has its dearly beloved fan base of people who have some nostalgic memory of this book, that is so thin. There's no real narrative there. So as soon as you start to tamper with it, you piss off everybody who loved the book. But if you were to just adhere to the book and shoot that, you'd have a really boring piece of cinema. So you're kind of screwed either way, is what we find out. Right. The Grinch had an advantage in that the character was kind of fun, nasty, and it also had a musical component that everyone was familiar with. So a Cat in the Hat, we had to conjure that all up. But ultimately, harder to translate that character from the book to a live action person dressed in a cat suit. It's just, we had the best people in the world executing it, and there was a lot of brain power went into trying to find the exact level of how much do we see versus how much do we don't. And ultimately, on some level it works, in some ways it did not work. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it borders on a horror movie, to be honest.
I don't know about that.
If you think about it, if you think about taking a man and dressing him up as a cat and then having him invade the home of two lovely little kids while the parents are away. Tell me that isn't a horror premise.
Yeah, I can see that now. Now that you put that in
So
perspective.
it's easy to like. There's something fundamentally creepy about that concept, but that wasn't our goal.
Yeah, yeah. But it's funny you mentioned that, right? Like Winnie the Pooh, there's a new horror movie that's coming out. I don't know if you've heard of it.
What
Um,
is it?
Winnie the Pooh, the classic
Oh
book.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, the Blood and Honey, because the rights were open and they just made a complete like crazy movie out of it.
Oh, good.
So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a Cat in the Hat horror version down there.
The one thing we were successful at is that the Ted Geisel's widow, Audrey Geisel, and the estate of all of his properties were so horrified at Cat in the Hat that she banned any further live action representation of their characters. That's how good we were. I saved some people the embarrassment of trying to do it live action again. So I don't know whether that's a good thing or not, but she was horrified.
Right. I, I
But as I said, I don't know how you translate it. We all did the best we could.
well, that's the
And
thing, right? Yeah.
to be honest, they're a very interesting, not entirely small fan base that likes this movie 20 years later. It's very interesting.
And that's what I was gonna say. So when I saw it first, when it came out, I'll be flat honest with you, I didn't like it. Right? Like I just did not
Mhm.
like it. And
Sure.
then I saw it with my kids, and I liked
Hmm.
it. And I think and I think what I just saw it again like a couple of days ago before our conversation, just to kind of refresh my memory, and I was trying to analyze it, in the most hardcore way possible. What went wrong?
Right.
What went wrong with this film? And from the standpoint of box office and critics and everything, and I noticed that it was just a fun movie, and I think if you don't dissect it as a as a proper, like a three arc, like a no, 3 act story, it actually
Yeah.
works if you want to be entertained. The visuals are just so breathtaking. I mean, they're just
Yeah.
out of this world that you, even if you don't like the story, you're still, kind of just brought into the film, into the visuals that you don't want to get out. And I enjoyed it watching it the third time. Like, obviously the first time I didn't like it, second time with kids, and now this. So it's not as bad as you think as it is. I mean, if
No,
you
I know. And also, we had, the writers, Schaefer, Berg, and Mandel. They were at that time were called the Seinfeld writers, but who are very, very talented writers and went on and have individually gone on to, incredible careers. Uh, their script, I loved it, and it was even more. There was even more anarchy in it in their earlier drafts that people got scared of, meaning the studio and Mike. Uh, and a lot of that was supplanted with kind of a lowbrow humor that I could have done without.
Mm.
Um, so it was a little ahead of its time because I think now people can handle that irreverence and that anarchy a little a little better. Back then
Yeah.
it was Cat and Hat was just too precious a piece of kiddie literature. And it's that old problem of, okay, you try to make a 4 quadrant movie, and all right, so it's for the kids, okay? But then we want the teenagers and the grown-ups to like it too. So you try to mix, your tone becomes sometimes too rough for kids, and sometimes it's too juvenile for grown-ups. So another trap. I've always went in design work as well. I do it to serve the narrative, illustrate characters, but also almost entirely to amuse myself. If I like it and I can sell it, it always seems to work out. So if anything, I'd have made Cat in the Hat more anarchic, because ultimately it is this weird ass cat comes into your house and destroys it and tries to, alleviate you of your symptoms of boredom, and then leaves, and then everything's fine. It's a crazy idea, so why not, lean into that, as they say.
Yeah, and I think that's how you sort of learn too, right? Like you make certain mistakes based on your certain decisions, but at the same time, the bottom line that I've obviously learned, I have learned, I'm sure a lot of us learned, is that if you are enjoying something, that if your gut tells you that this is something that I'm liking it, more than likely the audience is going to like it. And I think that's the formula that everybody should sort of tangle on.
Yep.
In terms of your casting, obviously Mike Myers came with it, but your other cat actors, Dakota Fanning was up and coming at the time, and there's Alec Baldwin in it.
I had seen her in that film with Sean Penn.
Oh, I know, the one where he plays a handicap, right?
Yeah, that one. And I was just stunned at how angelic she was, and what a great actor at that age. And she was bulletproof, man. She was so good, and just shockingly smart for a kid that age. So yeah, no, I recommended her. I had worked with Alec Baldwin, so and of course love him, and he was perhaps the most fun aspect of the job for me, was when he would come to work. When he was on the call sheet, I would look forward to going to work, because he was so fun and would try stuff, and he just has a great presence and energy.
And I couldn't agree more about Alec Baldwin's performance in Cat in the Hat. I've never seen him in that kind of a role, at least to my knowledge. Like just completely out of the box. Like normally, he does thrillers, dramas, action. But that was good to see. And that movie that with Dakota Fanning and Sean Penn was I Am Sam. Just to refresh your memory.
What was it called?
I Am Sam.
Oh, that's right. I Am Sam. Yeah. Amy Hill was great. Mrs. Kwan. Sean Hayes is fantastic as the voice of the fish and Mr. Humberflube.
No, the casting was bang on. I'll just say, in terms of Mike Myers, I think he was amazing. But in Austin Powers or other films of his, like the expressions were there, but I think because obviously it required, at least for me, I didn't register with his performance that much as I wish I had. But overall, I mean, he was phenomenal.
Yeah. You know what, he would here's what made it really hard to do also, is right off the bat, and our line producer Eric had said, you're not going to get Mike on the set until late in the day. And I said, why? And he said, and Mike says, I'm not funny before noon. So how that really translates is he doesn't even get into the makeup chair till noon. So he's ready to shoot around 3:30 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, you've got kids who are, they're done at 5. And so there were weeks and weeks go by where you're shooting the bad stand-in version of Cat in the Hat, who really was scary looking. opposite these kids, and then you're shooting Mike with small people in the scene. So you had a very limited amount of time to get everybody in a shot, which is a real handicap when you're trying to do comedy.
How, I mean, obviously, I've read about that many, many times. Um, it sometimes it becomes very evident in a film that when you have two actors who are not in the same, who are not filmed at the same time, or three actors or four, being on the set, how did that make you feel at the time? Like, is this even gonna work, or what am I doing, or
Yeah, no, I never saw a complete cut of a scene until like 6 weeks into it. It was all just pieces, so you don't really know. And Don Zimmerman, the editor, who's a very talented editor, and he did Hal Ashby movies, and he was kind of a genius about it. But really, you don't know what you got until you're deep into it, and it's too late. I must also say, Kelly Preston, the late Kelly Preston. Oh my God, what a doll she was, and so talented and beautiful, and man, that's yeah, and a very important part of that cast, because I don't know, I was just she was great.
I genuinely think with the amount of time the film had, as an audience member watching it, everybody, you know, really hit the chord really, really well. And I think that to me stands out more than anything else. Yes, the visuals were great, but it was just a very different type of humor that kept you engaged, at least for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, for me too. And there were, I must admit, there were times on set when Mike was really in the zone, as they say, and shooting in person when the cast and crew are around was just ridiculously hysterical and fun. And you think, oh my God, this is going to be the greatest thing ever. But a lot of that stuff is not necessarily what you're filmed, and has nothing to do with the narrative. It's just him entertaining us, and he was really good at that on a number of occasions. I gotta say, we were just like choking with laughter.
and I think that's what separates from a situation that you did The Cat in the Hat with films or TV productions where everybody's present, because you could feel that comedy right there if it's not there, right? Like if that chemistry. Yeah. Like Seinfeld, for example. I mean, you have four of them in one room, and if something is not funny, it will come up immediately.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And Bo, how difficult, or it wasn't difficult, was it that you were directing this film for the first, like you were a first time director, but you had been production designer all your life, trying to separate the two and not in any way micromanaging, and kind of making sure that your job is just sticking to the directing job? How was that experience?
Well, it's hard not to gravitate towards your comfort zone, especially when there's so much pressure. I would get together with Alex, and it was almost like relaxing and therapeutic to spend time with him, reviewing stuff and picking colors. And but really, he assembled an amazing team and is very talented. And I we would talk, we would we would do our thing and go back and forth a bit, but pretty much he ran that, and I was able to stand back, because you can't, there's just not enough, hard drive in your head to to get involved in both things on something of that scale. So he was fantastic. And at the time I was looking for a production designer, and people would say, "Who are you going to hire for a production designer? Who?" And I had a couple people, but they weren't available. But in researching it, I really liked Fight Club, and I know it had nothing to do with what we were about to do, but I can as a production designer, I can tell, who's got the talent just by looking at totally unrelated work. And so that's what I liked of his. And there was other stuff as well, and then I met him and hired him on the spot.
One thing that I really, I mean, these are little tidbits, just a comment. It came out in 2003, and I think there was a scene where Dakota Fanning's character was holding like a cell phone with a screen on it, and this was like way before iPhone ever came out, or foreshadowing. And then there was even like a scene which is kind of very fresh in mind there was a scene where they have like a hygiene, like what's the word I'm looking for? What's that liquid that we use with COVID nowadays that you have to go in a room? When you go to a store, when you rub it on your hand. God, it's like such a common word.
Oh, right. The hand sanitizer.
Hand sanitizer. There's a scene of that in there.
Yeah. There's that where Sean Hayes' character Humberflube he carried it on his belt, and he was a germaphobe. Yeah, that is funny now that you mention that. I hadn't even thought of that.
Any kind of obstacles that you came across on the set, and how did you overcome it as a director?
I really didn't have, aside from that time thing where you get the kids early in the day, and then you get Mike from, for like 3 to whenever he kind of wears out. That was the biggest obstacle was for me, was not having more overlap. Then we built that. The other thing that was a pain in the ass was we built the collection of houses, which when I look at it, I go, oh my God, this is so cool looking. We built that in a valley out in Simi Valley. We had selected it during one season, and then when we came back to shoot it, I guess it was in the spring, and there was some weird phenomenon where in the morning, the ocean is cold, the desert's hot, and it would pull fog into that valley. And there were days when you would drive up to that set, and you could just see the lilac and blue tops of houses peeking out above the fog, and it was phenomenally gorgeous, but a horrific nightmare for us, where we ended up doing sky replacement to get rid of fog. It was just a nightmare. Beyond that, the actual, we had such a great crew assembled for it, and $100 million movie, you have no excuses. The shooting went as well as it could. Post, which was very new to me, started out great, and then went a little south.
And how did you work in post? I mean, a lot of directors work differently. Were you sitting with the editor most of the time, or was it like a weekly kind of come in and more coming in at the end of the wrapping up of the post?
He had a great rough assembly by the time we were done. And I would hang out with him every day, and because it was new to me, I was really curious about it too. But I was there every day until we finished the 10-week director's cut. And at that point, then we showed it to Mike, and Mike said, he was so relieved. He said, normally at this point, I'm ready to blow my brains out. This is the best first cut of a movie I've ever seen that I've worked on. And we thought, wow, great. But that was a little bit not true.
But here's the thing, right? And this is not talking about the Cat in the Hat. And I think a lot of films go through this is, you make a film, there's pre-production, there's production, there's post-production. We always talk about the three aspects, but then there's a thing called marketing, right? Like putting it out there. And a lot of times based on screenings and test screenings, the marketing team, again, because they're doing their job, because at the end of the day, it's about making the profit, right?
Right.
They come back and they're like, okay, this needs to be done, that needs to be done. So how, not even talking about Cat in the Hat, just in general, how do you feel about that aspect? Because sometimes the marketing teams do make the wrong call, right? Like they do screw up,
Sure.
right? And I think I was speaking to Dean Parisot, the director of Galaxy Quest. I'm not sure.
Yes. Yeah, I know him. He's a great guy.
Yeah, he's a wonderful guy, and he was telling me that how Galaxy Quest faced a similar marketing fiasco. Even though it was a great film, it was received really, really well. And then Jeffrey Katzenberg called him a couple of weeks later, and he said that look, we screwed up. Because they marketed the film not the way it should have been. So how in your view, how much you feel the marketing team should have a say after it's been, given a pass from almost everybody at the studio or the actors or the producers? Again, we're not talking about Cat in the Hat. It's a very general question.
Yeah. I think very too often the marketing determines the movie where it should be the other way around.
Yeah.
I think very often, or especially maybe back then, it feels like they would put a deal together, cast the actors, the two leads, work out the marketing, and then write the script and shoot it. It's like the priorities were back-asswards.
And I think that started after the internet age started. I believe it became more of a thing once the internet kicked off that, okay, we got to do it this way.
Right. That the marketing precedes all the other, all the, it's like ready, aim, shoot, that idea.
And what do you feel about this question? I get this.
Ready, shoot, aim.
Right.
Yeah.
And Bo, one thing that I feel that I wish, I don't know how you feel about this now, is that you directed Cat in the Hat, and I don't think you directed anything afterwards, right?
No, I have directed. I directed 5 hours of a series of unfortunate events, of which we did 3 for Netflix. Right. Yeah. So I designed and directed in that case with my friend Barry Sonnenfeld, with whom I've done more work than anyone, and with whom I share a lot of sensibilities in regards to movies and life. So I did that. We did 3 seasons, and each season I did a block. So. And
how was that? I haven't seen it, so I don't know.
You should see it. It's some of my favorite work, period. And it's a great design job, all 3 seasons. And if you like Patrick Warburton, who I love, it's great. It's just I highly recommend it. It's insane.
Oh wait, is this on Netflix?
So I directed. I don't know if you're familiar with a series of unfortunate events. You remember they made the movie Lemony Snicket?
Yeah. Jim Carrey one.
It takes the books and we shot, all the books. So in the first season, I did The Miserable Mill, and then I did the second season, The Ersatz Elevator, and then I did the end, the last episode. And each one is insanely different, but really fun. We shot all on stage, so everything is constructed, except a couple of exteriors on Miserable Mill. So it's very, very controlled, and was utterly exhausting to do both. But I put together a great team, and I would always direct towards the end of the season so that I would get as far ahead as I could design wise, and then I would rely on a great crew to execute while I'm prepping to direct. So it was an insane amount of work, but it was really fun, and it's like living a parallel life.
I'm gonna check that out. And I'm a huge fan of Barry's work, by the way, Men in Black. I mean, God.
So am I. Yeah. So I did that directing, and that was really fun. I think I directed a couple episodes of the Tick, the original one with Patrick Warburton. I think that may have been, was that before Cat in the Hat? I don't remember. It's a blur. And after Cat in the Hat, I tried to get a few other jobs going, and couldn't make it happen. I had some, smaller, more independent kind of movies, and that's a whole different world. Wow, trying to put those together, and they say, well, here's who you need to cast in order to make this foreign sales thing, and couldn't quite pull it off.
Yeah, that's a challenge now, right? It goes back to my marketing thing. It's like now everything is about so many other things first, then the art.
Yes. And it's all sort of mysterious too, as best I can tell. As far as, well, you need this person so that we can make a sale in wherever, Eastern Europe.
Yeah. No. I didn't know you had worked on Color Purple as well.
Yes, that was my last job as an art director, and it was the last year they included art directors in the Academy Awards, so we were nominated. And my dear friend, again, the late Mike Riva, I had worked with him, and he was a good friend of mine as well. And at the end of Color Purple, he said, you should be designing your own movies. And I said, yeah. And he's the one, he got called to design Bright Lights, Big City and Joel Schumacher was going to direct it at the time. And Mike couldn't do it because he had something else to do. And he said, you should do it. So we went to Joel Schumacher's house and knocked on the door, and Joel came to the door, and Mike said to Joel, I can't do it. Here's who you should hire, while we're standing on his doorstep. And Joel thought, okay. But then he ended up not doing that movie. In the meantime, he produced a television movie for Showtime that I did design, and then when he did Lost Boys, he hired me. So I owe a lot of that transition to production design to Mike Riva. Yeah.
No, I didn't know that art director used to be a category at the Oscars at any point in history.
So. Yeah, they I think it used to be way back when, and then they gradually, in their effort to thin out statues, eliminated it. And I think even then, Kathy Kennedy and the people on Color Purple had to write a letter or something, say he did more than a normal art director. Because I got sent basically to North Carolina. Mike stayed in LA and worked on the sets there, and he sent me in advance down to North Carolina to work on the stuff there. And this is all pre-internet, and so it was fun.
I would love to. I mean, if you are down for it later on, maybe we'd love to talk to you about Color Purple and maybe even Men in Black, and have Barry on as well.
Sure.
Great. One last thing that I wanted to ask you is, what are your upcoming projects that you're working on?
I have nothing I can talk about right now.
Got it.
No, when people say they don't want it's soon to be announced, you can't talk about anything in the future. It's bad luck.
100%. You actually, they say that you shouldn't talk about your plans,
till they're done.
Yeah, till they're done, exactly. Which in Hollywood is impossible, because you have to make a formal announcement and all that stuff, and get the buzz going and get the release date going. But listen, Bo, this has been fantastic. I will be in touch, and maybe we can schedule this in the next coming months again.
You bet.
All right.
Okay.
Take care, Bo.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.